Welcome back to the Oscar Project Podcast, the show where I discuss Oscar-nominated films year by year. I am your host, Jonathan Eichenberg, and after a bit of a break, I'm back to talk about the films of the second Academy Awards. I'm joined today by Louis Beer, who writes the Slow Moving Pictures newsletter, and we're going to talk about the second Oscars as well as run through the lost nominees from 1928 and 1929. Louis, thank you so much for joining me to talk movies today.
Hi, Jonathan. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor to be here.
Well, before we jump into the preview of the second Oscars, tell the listeners a little bit more about yourself and where they can find you online.
That's right. Yeah. So I have a Substack called Slow Moving Pictures, where throughout this year I am posting a weekly series of essays, I guess, about Red Desert, which is a 1960s Italian film, classic film by Michelangelo Antonioni. And I'm going through that film scene by scene, moment by moment, and just saying everything I can possibly think to say about it. It's kind of like a slow motion commentary track in 52 parts with lots of pictures, but no audio. So yeah, it's a very important film to me. It's all about kind of being out of step with reality, which is how I feel. So yeah, anyone who feels alienated from the world and their fellow human beings should join me on my depressing journey through this film. Talk a lot about a lot of other films as well, paintings, music, all kinds of stuff. So it's a lot of fun, but yeah, in a dark, depressing kind of a film.
It's always good to kind of slow down and analyze some stuff like that sometimes. I really like that project you're working on.
Thank you.
Well, let's get into the details of the second Academy Awards. They were held on April 3rd, 1930 at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles and honored the films released between August 1st, 1928 and July 31st of 1929, although there are actually two outliers in that, which we'll get to at some point. They were hosted by William C. DeMille, who's the elder brother of the famous director Cecil B. DeMille. We had 12 categories at the first Academy Awards, which were reduced down to 7 for the second. The two Best Director categories, comedy and dramatic, were combined into one. Best Writing was combined from adapted and original down to just one writing category. And then the Best Engineering Effects, Best Unique and Artistic Picture, and Best Title Writing categories were all discontinued going forward. Unlike the first awards, the winners at the second Academy Awards were not announced ahead of time, which obviously has continued to this day. And at this ceremony, there were actually never any official nominees, where the Academy kind of came up with a list of unofficial nominees using some of the records from the films that the judges had given their opinions on. So obviously a lot looser than we have today with the Academy Awards. Any thoughts on the second Academy Awards, some of the things that they have that obviously have been different over the years?
Yeah, not too much. No, I mean, I was fascinated by the fact that Street Angel got nominated again. I think you're covering it again, aren't you, in your next episode?
Yes, yeah.
Do you know why that was? Do you know why it was nominated for one set of awards in the first?
Yes. So it was nominated. The nomination at the first was for acting for Janet Gaynor. She was nominated for Street Angel and a couple of other films actually. So it was just the acting nomination in the first Academy Awards, and then the second it was nominated in the cinematography category as well as Best Art Direction. So they just didn't feel like it was good to be nominated that first time around, but apparently they wanted to nominate it. And that's actually one of the ones, I think it was officially released in April of 1928. So it falls before that August 1st date, but somehow it still did sneak in there, as does the other film that I'm covering next week, Skyscraper. So it's kind of an outlier. You know, again, they were still figuring it out at that point. So they didn't have any firm rules nailed down, I don't think.
No, it's so strange, isn't it? I mean, one of the interesting things that I guess we might touch on today is that F.W. Murnau, by the time I think I read this, that by the time Sunrise won that sort of Best Picture Oscar or Best Original Artistic Film Oscar, that ceremony I think was in 1929, so 2 years after the film had come out. Like, he'd already left Hollywood by then to go and make Taboo. So the timing of these first two Oscars really kind of always confused me, and yeah, I always kind of settled into a more rational kind of timing of things from I think the third one on, didn't they?
Yeah, and it's actually interesting. Obviously, I'll cover when I get there, but there were two Academy Awards ceremonies in 1930. This one for the second, which was in April of 1930, and then the third Academy Awards was that November 5th, 1930. So just imagine if we had Academy Awards ceremonies 6-7 months apart from each other nowadays, everybody would be going crazy.
Yeah, with all the drama there was around the latest one, it's
Right.
everyone would just lose their mind, wouldn't they?
Couple of kind of firsts and trivia tidbits about the second Academy Awards. Chester Morris was the first nominee for Best Actor who was actually born in the 20th century. He was nominated for his role in Alibi. And on a sadder note, is it Jean or Jeannie? I'm not sure. Jeannie Eagles became the first and, as of our recording, only actress to ever be posthumously nominated for the Best Actress category for her role in The Letter. A couple interesting acting tidbits. In terms of directing, The Divine Lady, which was the winner, directed by Frank Lloyd, was the last film to win the Best Director award without being also nominated for Best Picture, which I found kind of surprising that every single Best Director winner since then has also been nominated for Best Picture. That's kind of a incredible streak that we've got going. And then this is the only year in 97 years now, as of the last Oscars, where no film won more than one Oscar. There's seven categories, seven different films won. Obviously, we've got a lot more categories nowadays, but it'd be hard pressed to see a separate film winning all of the categories now that we've got so many of them today.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, I was thinking, looking through the list, it seems like there are so many films represented in this second Oscars, and there's such a variety across the different categories. So that's really interesting. I guess it has been slightly more homogenized since then, almost. That
Yeah.
you tend to get, a smaller number of films kind of hogging all the awards.
Yeah, I mean, I forget how many actually won awards a couple of weeks ago at the 97th, but obviously I think there's 50 nominees, and I want to say probably only about 10 to 15 actual winning
Yeah.
films out of all of those. So definitely has scaled down in terms of the films that are winning based on the nominees. And then the last little tidbit I have is that this was the first Academy Awards ceremony that was broadcast on radio, and it was by a single station, KNX in Los Angeles. So again, one radio station broadcasting to now broadcasting around the world on television, internet, radio, things people didn't even know existed at that time.
Yes. Live tweeted everything. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I want to go through the nominees, the full list of the nominees. Before I go over those, I wanted to make a quick programming note. When I first started this podcast several years ago, I had originally intended on going through things, kind of starting with the films that had just been nominated, and then some of the winners, and then finish up each season with the Best Picture winner. I decided to change things up this time around and go chronologically so that we could offer a little bit more historical context. And obviously, 1929, 1930, we're starting to get into the Great Depression era. And a lot of these films had been released before the official start of the Great Depression, the big stock market downturn. So I want to be able to provide some of that context of what was going on in the world. And also, as we move forward into the 1930s, obviously there's a lot of other things that start happening in the world that relate to movies, affect movies. And so I want to be able to discuss that as we go along. So we'll be taking things chronologically for the most part from here on out. So if you want to follow along with most of these movies are available. I'll have some links to where you can watch them online. Most of them are on YouTube. So that said, we'll go ahead with the nominees for the second Academy Awards. They are Skyscraper, Street Angel, The Patriot, The Cop, Our Dancing Daughters, Four Devils, Sal of Singapore, White Shadows in the South Seas, The Awakening, The Barker, A Woman of Affairs, In Old Arizona, The Broadway Melody, Weary River, The Leatherneck, The Bridge of San Luis Rey, The Divine Lady, Coquette, The Letter, Alibi, The Valiant, The Hollywood Review of 1929, Thunderbolt, The Last of Mrs. Cheney, Wonder of Women, Drag, Madam X, and Dynamite. Some very interesting titles there as I read through them. Some of them are, you don't get titles like those anymore.
Yeah, you immediately want to know what the film is about, don't you?
Exactly. So those are the films for the most part that we'll be covering this season on the podcast. Obviously, some of them are unfortunately no longer available because they're from over almost 100 years ago. And some of them do still exist in pieces, but oftentimes are not readily available. They're not online. There's no DVDs that have ever been made of them, things like that. So wanted to talk through some of the what I'm calling lost nominees. Obviously, not all of them are truly lost, but lost to most people who don't have access to film archives and stuff like that. And the first of those is The Patriot. And it's actually the only Best Picture nominee that is considered to be a lost film. There is some, from what I've read, some pieces of it at the UCLA Film and Television Archive, but obviously not the entire film. Any notes that you have on The Patriot in terms of the lost Best Picture nominee?
Yeah, I mean, this seems like a really interesting film. It's kind of painful that there is a substantial amount of it still in existence and we can't see it.
Yeah.
I wish that had been put on one of those. I think the trailer is on one of those Treasures of American Film sets that came out years ago, which are really wonderful. And it would be nice to see, that fragment released in some form. Like Frank Borzegui's The River only exists as a fragment, but it's still a great film. Just in what we can see of it. And well, The Patriot sounds kind of amazing. I had some thoughts on its connection with The Last Command. I don't know if that's something that we want to talk about now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Before I let you get to that though,
Yeah.
so just the quick story, it's that it says it's Count Palin's plot to remove the Tsar of Russia from the throne, and it's Emil Yannings, who is the star as the Tsar. Obviously, I talked about The Last Command, where he starred again as a Russian aristocrat, so kind of a similar type character from The Last Command. So obviously some connections there.
Yeah, you did a great episode on this with Vicky Leslie, I think, didn't you, in your previous season? Yeah, and you had a really interesting discussion about this film. I mean, it's such a The Last Command is one of my favorite silent films, I have to say. It's just so wonderful. And I think that's what drew me to The Patriot as well, was just reading about it and watching the trailer. It seems like it has a kind of strong relationship. Although I think von Sternberg was very rude about it and said he didn't think it was much good. But yeah, it's this film about this sort of crazy Tsar Paul and this plot to kill him. His friend Parlin plots against him and ends up getting him killed. And the film ends then with that character Parlin himself being killed and sort of saying as he dies, I know I have been a bad friend, but I have been a patriot because he's killed his beloved friend. It's in the best interests of his country. He's sort of done something that pains him personally for the sake of his kind of patriotic duty. And I thought that was interesting because it's kind of like the opposite of what we see in The Last Command, isn't
Yeah.
it? Where Jennings' character is constantly embarrassed by the Tsar, like he just finds him despicable. The Tsar kind of calls the troops back from the war and insists on seeing them parade. And Jennings is just kind of frustrated by this, but he still serves him loyally because he thinks that's for the good of the country. And that's why the revolutionary Evelyn Brent falls in love with him, because she sort of sees his patriotism and kind of loves that fundamental bond between them, even though they're on opposite sides of the conflict. So yeah, it's kind of like it's the same kind of emotional and moral ambiguity, but it's in relation to different moments of Russian history. Just a strange coincidence, I guess.
Yeah, and then that was actually something that I found obviously with several of the films from the first Academy Awards and seems to have carried over to this second where there was a fascination with that kind of fall of the Russian aristocracy that had happened a little bit before this time period. So it was interesting to see that through line. It seemed like it was that and World War I were kind of the key themes that people kept coming back to in terms of stuff they wanted to revisit and film.
Absolutely, yeah. It must be. Yeah, it's strange because I guess I'm used to the era of Hollywood where they just portray communists as evil, or the kind of revolutionaries as evil, and
Yeah.
that's the kind of that's the stereotype in a way. But in The Last Command, you have this revolutionary character, the William Powell character, who sort of ends up being a director in Hollywood, and there's something kind of slightly mind blowing about
Yeah.
that trajectory that character has. If you compare it to you could never have had a character like that, I think, in the early 50s or something.
So The Patriot, obviously, we mentioned it was nominated for Best Picture. It was also nominated for Best Writing, which it won the award for, and also nominated in Best Director, Best Actor for Lewis Stone, who plays the Palin character, and Best Art Direction as well. So it was one of two films that received 5 nominations at the Second Academy Awards, which was the most for that second ceremony. So again, really sad that that one is lost, and hopefully someday they can find the rest of it and put together a release so that all of our Best Picture nominees are at least available to view.
Let's hope so.
So we'll move on from The Patriot to Four Devils. This one is kind of, I think, the other film in this batch that the most has been written about, the most is known about, and it is. There's actually a short documentary film about it called Murnau's Four Devils: Traces of a Lost Film, which is available on YouTube. It's got some really cool still pictures, production, imagery, things of that nature. So it's again sad that this one's lost. It's another Janet Gaynor film. Obviously, we've had a bunch of those on the podcast so
Yes.
far.
Yeah.
And you mentioned it's a Murnau film as well. So lots of information is available on this. People can obviously go and read up on it. Basic story here is of four orphans who become a high wire act in the circus and some of the crazy encounters that they run into. And I actually saw that it was released. Obviously, we're at the kind of the transition between silent and sound, so it was released with a synchronized musical score in 1928. And then again in 1929 with some partial talkie portions to it. So, and unfortunately, both of those versions no longer exist, at least to our knowledge. So, really sad that that one's lost as well.
Yeah, this might be the ultimate kind of holy grail of lost silent films. I mean, the obvious example of that is von Stroheim's Greed, the full version of that, which was supposed to be 8 hours long and only 2 hours survives. But at least there, the 2 hour Greed is still a masterpiece. It's still a great film. But here, Four Devils is this, sadly late career masterpiece by Murnau, one of the best directors of all time, and it just doesn't survive at all. It's really kind of heartbreaking.
Yeah, it's quite sad, and then I would have loved to have been able to see this, and compare this back to the other Gainer films that I covered last season, and see what was different, what was the same. Obviously, a couple of the ones from the previous season were her with Frank Brzezzi. So, how did she appear differently? How did Murnau direct her differently than the work that she did with Brzezzi and Charles Farrell? So, really sad that this one's lost.
Yeah, particularly for Janet Gaynor. I mean, I'm a big fan of hers. I love. I mean, like you were just saying, this is a wonderful era for Janet Gaynor fans because she's so many things, and she does kind of different things as well. I mean, some of the reviews of Four Devils apparently said that she was overshadowed by Mary Duncan, who plays the woman who comes into the circus and kind of threatens to break up the act. She falls in love with Fritz, the man that John Gaynor is in love with. But I don't know. I mean, I wonder if we could see the film if we would just see that Janet Gaynor is just doing something maybe subtler than what we normally saw in her films, doing something different. Does seem like a kind of character that she didn't normally play. I mean, Street Angel was an important precedent for this, but Roy now saw Street Angel and liked it so much that he hired the cinematographer from that film, Ernest Palmer, to do this one. And I wonder if he also kind of saw something in Angela, in the character that Janet Gaynor plays in that film. There's a kind of darkness to her. There's she's sort of torn between this very hard-nosed personality that she projects and her deep kind of sensitivity. That's the tension that the film is built around. And in Four Devils, she's playing a character who is kind of overwhelmed with these really dark emotions that ultimately make her kill the man she loves and herself. She causes them to fall to their death by sabotaging their act. And I would love to see what Janet Gaynor, this kind of stereotypically kind of sweet-natured, sweet-looking actor would have done with a role as dark as this one.
Yeah, and just thinking about, in a practical sense, shooting things of a circus. Obviously, we had the Charlie Chaplin film, The Circus, in the first Academy Awards, which I've covered before, but shooting scenes of high wire acts and trapeze or anything like that at that time, you didn't have digital, you didn't have a green screen or even stuff like that that they could use. So a lot of that had to be done practically, and obviously put the performers in some real danger, I'm sure, as well. So it'd be interesting to see that.
Yeah, Janet Gaynor said she was terrified. I mean, there was a scene at the end where they both die, where she sabotages the act, and she had to sort of hold Charles Morton, the actor who plays Fritz, by her leg. He was sort of like clinging onto her legs and weighing her down. I mean, they weren't going to fall, but still, the weight that was pulling on her was so agonizing. And she said afterwards, I didn't know what was going on. I was just expressing pain. And Murnau, charming man that he was, said, "No, that's exactly what I wanted. I just wanted to put you in terrible pain, so that you would play that role." But yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, the kind of circus genre, I guess, and I think you're right. That's part of what appealed to Murnau, no doubt, about this story, is that opportunity to film these kind of death-defying acts. It's a very cinematic setting, very popular genre in the 20s. So yeah, I think there's a lot to say potentially about this as an example of the circus genre, and that's another reason why I'd love to see it, to put it alongside all those other great circus films from the
Yeah.
20s.
So we'll move on from Four Devils to Sal of Singapore. Sal of Singapore is nominated for Best Writing, and it's actually one of several films written by Elliot Clausen to land in that category at the Second Academy Awards. It's worth mentioning, obviously, today we've pretty much standardized 5 nominees per category at the Oscars, with the exception of Best Picture, which now gets 10. For a long time, that was kind of whatever, and mentioned earlier there were no really official nominees here, so it was, who got the most write-ins on some of these. There was actually, I think, 11 films I counted nominated in the best writing category here, and some of the categories had 6 nominees, so it was still a little bit of the Wild West. And Elliot Clausen was the writer on 3 of the films that were nominated for best writing. Didn't win any of them, but still got 3 nominations there.
That's a nice compliment. Even if you don't win, it's great to be nominated for three different things, I think.
The other two, Skyscraper, is one of the ones I'll be covering next week, and then the Leatherneck we'll be covering later this spring. And I've seen it says that prints of this film exist somewhere. I'm not able to find it online. I don't even see any information kind of where prints are available, if they're in an archive somewhere. So maybe we'll get a release of this at some point in the future. But as of right now, Sale of Singapore is unfortunately not available to us. And I don't really have too much information about this one that I was able to find. It's based on I think it's a book called The Sentimentalists. So, do you have any information on the film itself in terms of the story?
Nothing that kind of jumped out to me. Did you notice if it's a part talkie? I'm assuming it's maybe a part talkie or a fully scented film or
Yeah, it says there is some audible dialogue and talking sequences, and obviously a synchronized musical score, which was kind of the earlier trend with the sound. So yeah, partial talkie again. That'd be another great reason to have this one back. Would be to see some of those early talking scenes as well.
I wonder if that's one of the reasons why, even when there is a print of some of these films available somewhere, that companies are kind of, DVD companies are hesitant to put them out because I imagine this period, the very end of the silent era, that transition from silence to sound is maybe one of the harder ones to kind of market to people. I think it's sometimes films seem like they are of historical interest, but they're quite difficult to watch. I think they're fascinating. I think there's lots of great stuff there, but I wonder if it's just difficult to. I don't imagine they sell huge numbers, so maybe there's not
Yeah.
much of an
Yeah,
impetus to do that.
modern audiences are not clamoring for a DVD release of Sale of Singapore.
Sadly, no.
So the next up is The Awakening. This was nominated for Best Art Direction for William Cameron Menzies, which he actually won the Oscar the year before for his films The Dove and Tempest. This film was directed by Victor Fleming, who's obviously most famous for Gone with the Wind and Wizard of Oz. And from what I've been able to understand, the film is set during World War One in German-occupied France, and that's pretty much it. There's I think, some love story stuff going on. Again, this one, there's apparently one reel of the film that survives at the British Film Institute, but again, no release of that. And obviously, unless you've got some connections at BFI, you're probably not going to get into to get a look at the film itself. So we'll move on to the next film is The Barker. This one is technically not a lost film. It is, again, at the UCLA Film and Television Archives, and there's also a version, I think, at the Museum of Modern Art. This one was directed by George Fitzmaurice. Film is the story of a woman who comes between a carnival barker of the title and his estranged son, who is played by Douglas Fairbanks Jr., obviously son of the famous Douglas Fairbanks, who was very influential in Hollywood around this time. Based on a Broadway play of the same name, remade a couple times in the 30s with Clara Bow and in the 40s with Betty Grable, and also was remade twice in Japan, of all places, with a couple different titles. And the nomination here was for Betty Compson, who was nominated for Best Actress in that lead role of the woman who's the love interest.
Yeah, I really like Betty Compson in a Joseph von Sternberg film called The Docks of New York. I don't think you'll be doing that one. I don't think it got nominated for anything, but
No, I don't think so.
wonderful film. Yeah, she's really, really good in that. Really, just a poignant, sad performance she did in that film.
And this is another one. It is a part talkie. So again, synchronized musical score, some sound effects, and kind of starting to experiment with that sound and the talkie. Obviously, the barker of the title is probably one of the ones who gets some of the best dialogue in that, I would imagine.
Yeah, and another circus adjacent film, I guess, the
Yeah.
Carnival film is like Lilium, that kind of thing. It's another very cinematic setting. You have bright lights and lots of interesting sort of vivid action going on in the background.
Yeah, for sure, and that actually brings to mind something that I've talked about a couple times. The film Speedy that I covered in the first Oscars has a really fantastic scene at Coney Island, and actually the Skyscraper, which we'll be covering next week, has a little bit of a carnival scene as well. It's always I always love seeing those types of environments
Wow.
from 100 years ago. Obviously, there's elements of it that still survive in some places today, but for the most part, it's so different from what we know as amusement parks and carnivals today.
Yeah, my favorite example of that is in another film you covered, The Crowd, the King Video film. There's an amazing sequence where the characters go to Coney
Yeah.
Island and we just see them. It's beautifully filmed sequences, yeah, where they're just sort of riding on all the different attractions. It's so good.
So we're going to move on from the Barker, and our next film up is Weary River. Technically, again, not a lost film. May be available. I think it's got some DVD releases, but not readily available, at least that I found in local libraries and places like that. And it's one of three films that Frank Lloyd received Best Director nominations for this year. Again, I can't imagine seeing three films from one director get nominated, three Spielberg films or three Scorsese films. We don't get those that often, so it'd be hard to get them nominated in one year.
Yeah, I was looking this up just earlier today, and it is actually available on the Internet Archive. You can
Oh, okay.
see. I didn't have time to watch it, but it does seem to. It's got sound and everything. It seems to play pretty well, and it looks like it's in fairly good condition too. So yeah, if you
Fantastic.
can't find it on DVD, but and yeah, well, I'm looking forward to seeing I like Richard Baffinus. So
Excellent. Yeah, I hadn't been able to. I hadn't seen that. I sometimes forget to look on the Internet Archive because I forget that some of those are on there. So I'll definitely have to check that out, and maybe we'll add that to the schedule later in the season once we get to it.
I'm constantly amazed by the things that are available on the Internet Archive, books,
Yeah.
films. It's incredible how much is in there.
Yep, definitely a great resource for people who are kind of digging into this time period, and I've definitely found a lot of good things on there. Like you said, books, sometimes reviews of films of the period. It's a real good resource there. So we'll move on from that, since we might actually cover it a little bit later on, to The Bridge of San Luis Rey. This one's based on the novel of the same name by Thornton Wilder, and the film won the award for Best Art Direction. From what I read, there is a non-sound print of the film that survives at the George Eastman House, which is actually about 10 minutes from my house. So I might try and go see if I can sneak my way in there, but we'll see if they would actually let me take a look at it. And this one again was remade a couple times in the 1940s, and most recently in 2004, starring F. Murray Abraham, Robert De Niro, and Kathy Bates of all folks. I haven't seen that version of it, but might be interesting to check it out at some point.
I've never even heard of it, but
Yeah.
just based on those three stars, it sounds like it's worth seeking out.
And then next up is Wonder of Women, another Best Writing nominee that is lost. This is based on a German novel by Herman Suderman, whose name you might recognize from when I talked about Sunrise during the first Oscars. This one was directed by Clarence Brown, stars Lewis Stone again, and Lila Hyams. And this one is considered lost, with some sound discs from the audio of the film surviving at the UCLA Film and Television Archive. It's someplace I need to get to, because it seems like a lot of those are housed at UCLA if they're lost or partially lost.
That seems painful that only the sound discs from an early
Yeah.
talkie would survive, and only the scratchy nasal voices of, of the actors are not beautiful on it. It would be interesting to hear them.
I wonder how much you could piece together from the sound, and if there's any kind of still images from production that might survive somewhere. And last up in our Lost nominees is another Frank Lloyd film, one of the other ones that was nominated for Best Director. And this one is Drag. There are sources that say the film was thought lost, but I have not been able to find any copies either online or in any digital media, anything like that. Richard Barthelmess shows up yet again here in this film, and this one is based on a novel, also called Drag, a comedy by William Dudley Pelley. Lots of names that keep popping up here. Obviously, Frank Lloyd, Richard Barthelmess. So we see a lot of the same folks working and getting nominated in these categories for this first couple of years of the Oscars.
Yeah, that does sound like an interesting one. I think I read somewhere online that it exists in some form, but again, it's probably just nobody's in a great hurry to release that one.
Yeah, the preservation status on Wikipedia says the film was thought lost, long thought lost, but later was rediscovered. But it doesn't say where it is or how you can find it. So one of those things on Wikipedia, someone threw it in there, and no one's ever bothered to fact check it. So that's our list of lost nominees. Looking over that list, obviously we've kind of mentioned a few that we would really like to see at some point. But if there was just one of those that we've just talked about that you could bring back from the land of the lost, which one would it be?
It would be Four Devils. I mean, I think when I first learned about Four Devils, when I first saw that documentary, Traces of a Lost Film, I was a little skeptical about whether this was any good or not. I don't know why. It just seemed a little bit corny to me. But preparing for this, I read the novel, the story that it's based on by Herman Bang, who was a great writer of the sort of late 19th, early 20th centuries. He also wrote Michael, a book which was turned into a film by Carl Dreyer, which I really love. And yeah, the story is so interesting. It's so kind of psychologically complex and full of dark emotions. It's all about love as this overwhelming force that's like a pathological affliction. And I would just love to see what Murnau made out of that because it sounds like the film was Hollywoodized to some extent. Maybe they softened it a little bit, but I think it still seems like he retained a lot of the darkness and that might be a really unique entry in his filmography. I think it might be a film where we'd be looking at and saying, this is kind of like what we're used to seeing from G.W. Pabst or Carl Dreyer or Joseph von Sternberg. It's that kind of exploration of dark psychologies and emotions. And yeah, as I said before, the lost Janet Gaynor performance that might have showed some of her range that we really wouldn't otherwise know about. So it's really, yeah, really painful that that doesn't exist. And that's how, supposedly Mary Duncan had a copy of it or borrowed one. No one quite knows where it is now.
Yeah.
So who knows? These things do turn up sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes, from what I've read recently, they turn up and they just kind of sit on a shelf for a long time until somebody decides that they should go digging for it and finally dusts it off and finds a really nice copy of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I would go with Four Devils or possibly The Patriot just so that we could get a complete set of Best Picture nominees. I think those would be my two options if I was going to bring one back, if I had that power.
Yeah, The Patriot would be great to see as well. Lost Emil Yanning's performance, lost Ernst Lubitsch. It's both sad.
Well, Lewis, thank you so much for coming on the show and helping me preview the second Academy Awards. You will be coming back in a few months to join me for a single film episode, but in the meantime, remind people once again where they can find your work online.
It's Slow Moving Pictures. I think if you just Google that or slowmovingpictures.org on Substack, yeah, please do come along and subscribe.
And don't forget to follow The Oscar Project at theoscarproject.substack.com. Be sure to come back next Friday for my first individual film episode when Bethany Sigorski rejoins the podcast to talk about Skyscraper and a little look back at Street Angel. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you at the movies.